And I guess we have our next guest. Hey, Krish, how's it going? Can you hear me?
How's it going? Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Awesome. So we've got Krish here, who runs a podcast. Krish, tell us about your podcast and why this issue matters to you.
Yeah, I run two different podcasts. I have one called Forkful of Noodles, which is like a comedy commentary podcast where I talk about specific issues, specific news stories, and how they apply to people and why people should basically give a shit. And the second podcast is called Taboo Table Talk, which is an interview podcast where I interview comedians like Ron Placone. He's been on the show. And activists like you guys, organizers, politicians, musicians. And we just kind of talk about any issues that they're passionate about that people aren't fully aware of yet. So this was like right up my alley because podcasting happens on the internet. And if I say something that goes against AT&T or Comcast or Verizon, which I often do, and they don't like it, they can make sure that people don't get to see my show. And I think that's important for anybody that enjoys shows like that, anybody that enjoys shows that gives them a diversity of thought. If you're for the diversity of thought, you should care about net neutrality. You should be against what the FCC is doing right now. And you should definitely call your congressman and you should talk to people that aren't particularly educated on what net neutrality is. And I have this argument with my wife a bunch, is I think it should be a public utility, but I think we should also consider it as a basic need at this point, because so much of our information and so much of what we do is on the internet. We connect with people on the internet. We learn about a bunch of history, and I know kids now, like my cousins just moved here, and like everything that they do is on the internet. Like it's like they need the internet to do their homework. They need the internet to like find their books and stuff. So for us to have a free and open internet where we can exchange ideas and we can learn from each other, we can communicate with each other, is imperative. And I think it's that at this point is a basic need. Like, and I know a lot of people kind of get upset about that when you make that statement, but I think it should be a public utility and a basic need because of how influential it is in our society.
No, I think that's so important. And it's interesting because I think one of the things that we hear from, kind of telecom lobbyists is they sort of try to conflate the idea of like, this should be protected as a basic need with saying that, if we do that, then like the government is going to control the internet and they're going to tell us all what we can say and what we can do. And if I'm hearing you right, I mean, you run a podcast that's about politics. You want to have on people with a wide range of opinions. Maybe some of those opinions are controversial. So you're definitely not someone that's advocating for government censorship or control. In fact, I would imagine you would vehemently oppose something like that. But what you're recognizing is that, net neutrality protections are really preventing censorship and manipulation of the free flow of information and exchange of ideas online. And I totally agree. I mean, this is something that, kids doing their homework. I mean, like, come on, people.
Yeah.
It feels like a little bit of a no-brainer. I need to give a big shout out to our executive director, Sarah Gaudette, who has brought me a burrito. Jumbo-sized burrito. All day. But Krish, podcasting specifically strikes me. I mean, this is like a relatively new kind of medium and something that's maybe particularly vulnerable to the loss of net neutrality. I mean, it depends on streaming, right? Specifically. So what do you imagine, like, let's say we fail and we're not able to restore net neutrality protections. How could you imagine the world of podcasting changing and your ability to reach your audience?
I don't think I would be able to reach as many people if they can't download what I'm trying to do because their download speeds have been throttled because they're in an area that Verizon or Comcast has determined that if they don't want to pay an additional $25 a month or something, that they're not going to get access to larger files. And even the podcasts I listen to, like I listen to like Democracy Now! Or Jimmy Dore or whatever, and these are, or even like the Joe Rogan podcast, which goes on for 3-4 hours, and those are relatively larger files. So if you can't download them, then you're just not going to listen to them, you know. So if I want to grow my podcast and reach a wider audience, it's going to start becoming a lot more difficult. And I think, again, this becomes a bipartisan issue. There's no conservative should be against this, and no liberal should be against this. Everybody should say that we should have a free and open internet. So if you are for the exchange of ideas, and then it becomes like, who does Verizon really want people to listen to, right? Like, so if there is a podcast that's talking about how great Ajit Pai is and how great, Verizon lobbyists are and everything, and they want to like boost that, they can boost the speeds of that all day long, and that's the only thing people get to listen to, so they only get that one thought. And like, you shouldn't have just one thought. You should have as many thoughts as you can, because if we're a society that's okay with thinking critically, then we should be okay with looking at different thoughts, looking at thoughts that we disagree with, and we should have equal access to being able to find those thoughts, being able to find those podcasts that talk about different ideas and come from a perspective that you might disagree with, and know how to kind of go about learning from that, know how to understand how people that disagree with you think. Whereas I think when you block these podcasts that you might not be able to download because the speeds are too slow, then yeah, you're just gonna kind of get one thought, and we're all gonna get stuck in our bubbles, and we already kind of are doing that in certain respects, and it's not particularly helping us. It detaches us even further than what we already are detaching ourselves from. So if we want to stay more interconnected with each other and use the internet the way that I think it could be used, especially in terms of podcasting, where like I have people that listen to my podcast in Portland, Oregon, and I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that wouldn't be possible without a free and open internet. Because in Portland, Oregon, if they have slower internet speeds, all of a sudden, my 45-minute discussion about net neutrality is not reaching anybody. So I think it's incredibly important, like especially for the little guys, because smaller podcasts that don't have a huge following just yet, that are still getting their feet wet and figuring out what they want to do, they are not reaching as big of an audience as they could, and they might also not know what works and what doesn't, because they're not getting the feedback from the people that do listen to them, or the people that would be listening to them because of what they're talking about. So yeah, it's really, really it kind of spreads through a multitude of different
Totally.
subjects.
Yeah, no, and I really resonate with that personally. I was a professional musician for about 10 years before I came to work here at Fight for the Future. And, I'm from the LGBTQ community. I was playing sort of indie punk folk music, that like is not mainstream, is not going to be played on the radio. But because of the internet, and because, I was able to sort of just create music and put it online and share it with large numbers of people, I was able to build up an audience, and I was able to tour all across North America and show up in Europe and like play a show in Prague. And there's like 100 kids there that know all the words to all of my songs. And that doesn't happen. If I am starting out and I'm a brand new musician and I don't have a record label backing me and I don't have corporate sponsors, and I need to pay a fee to Comcast and Verizon and AT&T just to be able to share my music with the world, or the services where I might put my music up are being gouged in that way and then passing that cost along to me, I probably never would have done those things. I probably never would have built an audience or been able to share my art and creativity with the world. And it's just, it kind of breaks my heart to think about how many voices we would lose, from the fringes of all kinds. As you said. And another thing I think is really interesting is, here we are, where net neutrality is not a partisan issue outside of Washington, D.C. Voters from across the political spectrum overwhelmingly support it. But many of the Republican senators who are standing in the way of net neutrality are also out there every day saying things like that Facebook and Google are censoring conservatives. And I think that's particularly interesting because if you agree with them and you're concerned about these big centralized web platforms like Facebook and YouTube and Google and Twitter, and you don't like the way that they do content moderation, you've got to be supporting net neutrality.
Right.
We're stuck with these guys forever. No startup is ever going to be able to compete on a level playing field with these giant Silicon Valley corporations. If they can cut deals with Comcast and Verizon and T-Mobile and AT&T, and the rest of us are basically stuck in a slow lane or have our applications or our content blocked. So, I find that profoundly interesting, and I hope that we can get this message out to conservatives and to people that are concerned about the power that those companies exert over free speech, because that situation is only going to get worse if we're not able to restore net neutrality.
Yeah, and there was also it seemed very coordinated. I don't know if we ever found out proof that it was coordinated between Facebook and Twitter either, but that I think like 800 far left and far right, alternative news sites were taken off of Twitter and Facebook for very vague terms. I don't think Twitter ever gave them a reason as to why they took them down, but I think Facebook gave them the vague reason of, it violated our community standards, but then they don't really say what these community standards are. So, if you are going to have fast lanes and slow lanes because there isn't net neutrality, and then you have Facebook and Google and YouTube kind of censoring the content, it becomes a two-pronged attack. And it sounds very conspiracy theory-esque. Like when I talk to people, I'm like, I know I sound kooky, but if you look at what is actually happening with the JitPi taking down net neutrality, and then it's revealed, I think it was a couple months later, that Facebook was responsible for using our data through essentially like BuzzFeed quizzes or whatever. They took our data and they manipulated our psychology to control the election. And these are all coordinated attacks that now, without a free and open internet, without these protections that we need, they could probably keep doing that over and over again. And when Mark Zuckerberg went to that congressional hearing, it was so disappointing and kind of such a joke in terms of you're not really asking them anything. You're like, oh, you're a website on the internet, that's really cool, when it should have been why did you think it was okay to do what you're doing? And if the people that utilize the internet, if the people that use sites like Facebook and YouTube are not going to be protected, and their data isn't going to be protected, then I feel like we're misusing this really, really great tool that we have. I don't think we're using the internet to the best of its capacity to share, to share ideas, to share thoughts, and to move society forward. We're kind of using it as this really cool tool to just stay where we are and keep the people that are in power, and keep us arguing amongst each other, when it could be used for so much more.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think that's a great place to wrap up. And I think that's absolutely the battleground that we're on right now. The decisions that we make and the actions that we take right now could determine whether the internet overall is a net force for positive and a net force for good in our society, one that expands our democracy and basic rights, or it can easily be used, as you said, with the example of Cambridge Analytica, to undermine our democracy and to trample on our rights. And that's why this fight is important. And so I really thank you, Krish, for coming on and chatting with us about it. Where can folks find you on the internet?
You can follow me at Krish Mohan, on Twitter and Instagram. And my website is ramennoodlescomedy.com. It's RAMAN noodlescomedy.com. Thank you so much for having me.